Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are now in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 534, We See Comparatively. Now, Emily will only use that word comparatively one time in all of her 1,775 poems, and yet if you'll think about it, Emily is constantly comparing one thing to another thing. Now, this poem was first published in 1947 in the New England Quarterly, volume 20. In many ways, we're going to find that we're back to poem 125. You guys remember when we did this study? For each ecstatic instance, we must an anguish pay in keen and quivering ratio to the ecstasy. For each beloved hour, sharp penances of years, bitter contested farthings in coffers heaped with tears. And you guys remember when we did 241, she said it this way: I like a look of agony, because I know it's true. Men do not sham convulsion nor stimulate a throe. The eyes glaze once, and that is death, impossible to feign. The beads upon the forehead, by homely anguish strung. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments where we commented on the fact that Emily had to deal with a lot of anguish and a lot of pain in her life, suffering. Okay. And then I'm also hopeful that you've worked through the previous 533 poems. We just finished with 533, Two Butterflies. Now, in many ways, this is another theodicy. You'll remember from our study of the Big Five, the last of the Big Five, the question of theodicy. Why must there be pain? Why must there be suffering? And the only way often sometimes to handle pain is through time. In some ways we are back, of course, to Plato's Republic, especially Republic 7, and the whole notion of sight and coming out of the darkness of the cave into the light of the sun. That is to say, perspicacity. In our study of Plato's Republic, we've given full lectures at LearnStrong.net. You'll remember that we kept coming back to that word, perspicacity, the capacity to see things as they really are. Have you ever in your life had some amazingly large challenge? Can we just call it a Mount Everest challenge? But after a couple of days, it seemed to be nothing more than a Rattlesnake Ridge challenge? If you get my drift, the small hill at the edge of our town. In other words, we have this tendency to kind of build things up and make them, what was it 2 poems ago? Drama, as in drama, drama, drama. And then over time, there is this capacity to kind of watch that huge mountain go away. Emily, by the way, will reference a couple of different mountains in this poem as well. We see comparatively the thing so towering high, we could not grasp its segment unaided yesterday. This morning's finer verdict makes scarcely worth the toil. A furrow, our Cordillera, our Apennine, a knoll. Perhaps 'tis kindlier done us, the anguish and the loss, the wrenching for his firmament, the thing belonged to us, to spare these striding spirits some morning of chagrin, the waking in a gnat's embrace, our giants further on. Now, this is a very interesting word picture argument, that we start often by looking at our problems as Mount Everest. She'll mention it as Cordillera, the classic South American mountain chain, or the Apennine, the hills outside in Italy, outside Rome. Notice she says, we see. That is to say, we perceive. Can you write it that way? We perceive. We attend comparatively. Everything is about comparisons. Yes, we're to, of course, Swift's Gulliver's Travels, for example. Okay, mountains ultimately have a tendency to turn into molehills, or knoll hills, if you will, right? We see comparatively the thing so towering high, right? In other words, it's huge, and then it will become scarcely worth the toil later. We could not grasp its segment unaided yesterday. It seemed such a huge problem, such a huge challenge, such a huge amount of sorrow and grief. There was no way I was going to be able to deal with it. This morning's, notice now we're moving in time, this morning's finer verdict will take us back to 340. By the way, remember, Emily's daddy was a lawyer, so she used and heard lawyer language all her life growing up, so here it's the verdict, right? This morning's finer verdict right? The verse from the classic verse from the Psalms, joy in the morning will come, right? In other words, in the morning, all of our troubles seem a little bit different. The adults in your life, guys, are always telling you this, right? Oh, honey, I know it seems like a big deal. Go to sleep, get some good sleep, get up in the morning, and you'll see, in fact, that it's not as big of a deal as you think that it is. This morning's finer verdict makes scarcely worth the toil. It's almost like you laugh out loud, like, why was I giving so much time and energy to that? And then it becomes not a mountain, but a furrow, right? And then Cordillera. And by the way, she uses this word in 268, so maybe some of you will remember it there. We'll see it one more time in 1029. Our Apennine, you'll remember this one from poem 210, it's the Italian mountains. Knoll. Now, I can't help but think of Knoll and think about Whitman's Song of Myself, passage 46, right? I lead you to a knoll, my left hand hooking around the waist. Perhaps, and as we've said several now poems about perhaps, and when we hit 696, it'll be acres of perhaps. Perhaps 'tis kindly done us. In other words, think about this. Maybe she's saying it's actually better that we start out thinking everything is Mount Everest and end up thinking about everything as a little tiny mound in our backyard. Maybe it's better that way, because then we don't have to always get so worried about the terrible next mountain, because we remember, oh yeah, mountains have a tendency to become knolls in my life. So she says it this way, perhaps 'tis kindlier done us. The anguish, you'll remember from 241, I like a look of anguish. The anguish and the loss, the wrenching, by the way, it's the only time she uses this word in all her poetry. The wrenching for his firmament. You'll remember firmament from the previous poem, 533. Then step straight through the firmament. His firmament, the thing, notice we're back to it in the second line. The thing belonged to us. And then hear all these S sounds. To spare these striding spirits some morning of chagrin. The waking, back to poem 450, in a gnat's embrace. Our giants. Are we talking about the Himalayas of poem 252, maybe? Further on, when we get to poem 1738, we're going to come back to this idea. Here's how she says it there. Softened by time's consummate plush, how sleek the woe appears that threatened childhood's citadels and undermined the years. Bisected now by bleaker griefs, we envy the despair that devastated childhood's realm, so easy to repair. It's almost like the inverse in some ways of the argument she's making here. What is she saying? Well, one scholar has said it this way, quote, the value of any particular experience is determined by its context, which is, of course, a fancy way to say we have a tendency to overanalyze, don't we? To make things bigger than they are, and of course, over time, we go, oh yeah. But notice how we never seem to learn, right? So that the next fit of drama that arises seems to us like the worst imaginable Everest. And it never occurs to us to say, wait a minute, I've had 30 of these Everests in the last year, and all of them turned out to be little tiny knolls, little hills. Why am I getting so wiped out and worried about it now again? Finally, at 2b, hear all the S sounds of this poem. Go back and read it on your own. It's quite remarkable. At 3a, think about what Hamlet says in Act 2, Scene 2. Nothing, what does he say? Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And think about our great story from Taoism about the young boy who finds the ponies and brings them home. And the poor father is congratulated by his neighbor, and the father says, who knows what is good or what is bad? Sure enough, the son goes for a ride on one of the ponies, falls off the pony and shatters his arm, and now is disfigured and hurt for the rest of his life. And the neighbor comes by and says, I'm so sad for your loss. And again, the father says, who knows what is good and what is bad? And sure enough, the next morning, they come and try and take away children, young men, from the village to go fight in the war. And because his son has been injured, his son does not have to go. And again, hey, great job. You didn't have to lose your son to the war. Who knows what is good and what is bad? And really, Emily is playing that Taoist yin-yang idea. It isn't always clear in our minds what is good and what is bad, what is pain and what is not pain. what is alleviance from pain, and whether it's appropriate or not. Finally, in 3B, hey, now we'll ask you to own a poem like this. When was a time in your life when a mountain became a knoll hill? And now looking back, you literally almost laugh about the fact that you got so wound up about it. Thank you.